want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Our guest today on the enemies list is the great David Cay Johnston. He is a close observer of American politics and of one man in particular, Donald Trump. He has written two absolutely tremendous books about Trump that you absolutely need to read.
Let me stop you to get you to start over, Rick. Rick, let me stop you to start over for two reasons.
Okay.
It's Johnston with a T, and there's three books.
So sorry. All right.
It was a half a book 30 years ago, plus a half a book 30 years ago. So half a book about Trump. Okay. So
Johnston. Sorry. Our guest today on the enemies list is the great David Cay Johnston. David has written three books about Donald Trump, and the two you've probably been most familiar with before this are The Big Cheat and It's Even Worse Than You Think, both of which were absolutely scathing, unstinting examinations of the worst human being in the world. And he wrote another book back in 2016 called The Making of Donald Trump, which is something that gives you the biographical arc of this truly terrible, terrible man that we've all sort of found in the center of our political gravity well for the last 10 years or so. David Cay Johnston, welcome to the show. I appreciate you coming on today. I wanted to get your take about where you think Trump's head is at right now, because he's really being called onto the legal and PR carpet in a way this in the last few weeks, both in this trial with David Pecker talking about all the cover-ups, and sort of the brand of Trump has been under closer examination than it has been in a long time. How do you think he's handling all this?
Well, thank you for having me on, Rick. It's always a pleasure to be with you, whether it's here or in another forum. Donald is not a strong person. He's an empty vessel inside. He's emotionally a boy of about 13, the age at which he was sent away to a military academy known for humiliating the newer and younger cadets. Right. And he knows perfectly well that this is not going well for him, and he's not in control. In fact, the judge in the case just fined him, depending on which news report you read, either $8,000 or $9,000, but more importantly told him, violate the order again. The order says you may not attack or comment on jurors, witnesses, etc., and you may be jailed. Now, I've long thought Donald might be trying to provoke the judge into jailing him. On the other hand, Donald does not have the psychological strength, Rick, of, say, Nelson Mandela, who spent almost 30 years behind bars. You put Donald behind bars for one night, and he will fall apart.
I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, I do think that's something, we've all looked at this guy, this bravado, this big tough guy image, this swagger, and I'm the man. This really is a guy who wears a lot of hairspray and wears a lot of makeup and sleeps in craps in a golden toilet and sleeps in a soft bed every night. I don't think he would do well. Not even like Rikers, that would kill him. But even in like Metropolitan Correctional for a night, he would not do well.
Yeah, one of the things that's crucial to understand about Donald is that he is, in my view, the world's greatest con artist, because he conned himself all the way into the White House. Sure. But everything he tells you is just a fraud. He says he's the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects. Well, first of all, I'm not sure you can be the world's greatest expert on any one subject, but one of those subjects, taxes, is something on which I am a world-recognized authority.
Yes, you
and
are.
Donald, when Donald was sued by my New York Times colleague, or he sued my New York Times colleague, Tim O'Brien, over his really excellent book, Trump Nation. Donald was asked under oath, well, so Mr. Trump, what do you know about accounting? I don't know anything about accounting. You don't know anything about accounting? And they tied him down about 12 ways to make sure he couldn't escape that. In order to cover taxes, which was what I did at the New York Times for 13 years, I had to learn accounting. I had to learn it well enough that I actually, for 8 years, taught graduate accounting students after I left the New York Times. To say you're the world's greatest expert on the subject when you don't know one of its most fundamental aspects just shows it's all a con. So the bravado, the I'm a tough guy, Donald is a marshmallow inside.
Right. He's always had this image among his followers of being this manly man and all these things, but all the pathologies that he inherited from his really, and you know this better than anybody, his very broken upbringing, his very weird childhood, all these things that shaped him have left him. I mean, he's really. There are times, very rarely, that you look back, you're like, my God, what if this guy had gotten some therapy in his 30s or 40s or even 20s? What would we have instead of this thing? Because he really, I mean, it's always on display.
Right. I don't think therapy in his 30s or 40s would have helped Donald. I mean, he grew up in a horrendously horrible household. Little story about his father that'll tell you what a monster his father was. A boy named Johnny Messer lived a couple of doors down from the Trumps. And one day, riding his bicycle past the Trump house, he realized he dropped a quarter out of his pocket. He went back to retrieve the quarter, and Fred Trump just pulled into the driveway in his Cadillac. He went over and picked up the quarter, held it in front of Johnny, and said, "It's mine now," and put it in his pocket. I mean, who does that to a 5 or 6 year old boy?
Right, to a baby, to a child.
Yes, that's how the Trumps treat people. You are not a human being to Donald Trump, even if you're Melania. You are an object. You are to be either used or overcome. Donald has no empathy for anyone. I have people who've over the years said to me on radio shows or calling me at home, "You're just jealous of Donald Trump. You wish you were Donald Trump." You should be so glad you're not Donald Trump. This is a man who has never known love, contentment, satisfaction. He is an empty vessel in which he tries to fill himself with claims of riches he doesn't have. That's a con. Two multi-billionaires, absolutely provable multi-billionaires in public record, have both told me that for $20 million a year of spending, you can pose as a multi-billionaire, which is what Donald has been doing. And he also, if you watch his weight, he is a stress eater, and he's grown visibly larger. Somebody should do a photo comparison piece over the last few months. And one of the lies Donald tells is, we're about the same age.
Right.
Donald is 3 inches taller than me and claims to weigh 50 pounds less than I do. And it's just absurd.
Yeah, the whole the whole thing that he claims he's 215 pounds. I'm like, yeah, no, Chief. I do think when you wrote about how the Trump family had enriched itself and fleeced America during the administration. That really was one of those moments where I still think that is an underreported story in this country about how much they were using the hotels and the resorts as a particularly foreign cash pump for their declining fortunes, and how much winning the White House really and becoming a candidate was the best business Donald Trump's ever had. It's the best scam he's ever pulled.
Absolutely. And this was a way of paying tribute. And what I knew that my peers in journalism were not going to get the story right on the day of the inauguration. Trump leaves the Capitol. There are almost nobody standing on the sidewalks compared to when Obama went by and the sidewalks were stuffed. I mean, they were absolutely packed. And then the car stops, and all the TV coverage, is, they're stopping to get out and take a turn on the asphalt, and they waved to everybody. What not one TV station reported was where they stopped, which was in front of the Trump Hotel.
Right.
And this was a signal that ordinary viewers and the best journalists in America, by and large, missed, which was, you want something from my administration, pay me tribute. We've never had a president who did that. I mean, even Andrew Jackson, whom Trump reveres, a murderous, monstrous man, he didn't do that. But that's what Donald did. He sent a signal. So if you were a lobbyist, if you were a foreign emissary, where it's your job to pick up on signals, you got the signal. And pretty soon the Saudis are taking out 2 floors at the rack rate for a hotel. And if you don't know what the rack rate means, next time you stay in a hotel, look at the backside of the door. You may have paid $99, but the door may say maximum rate for this room, $524. And that's what the Saudis and others did. They paid the rack rate to pay tribute to Donald.
I was told at one point it looked like at one point the Trump Hotel, like 3 floors in a row, looked like a line of Middle Eastern countries. The Saudis on a floor, the Qataris on a floor. Over and over again, this incredibly obvious enrichment, this incredibly obvious violation of the Emoluments Act, and yet nothing seemed to bite on that. Not even politically, but legally, he never seemed to really take a hit on that, even though it was so unbelievably obvious.
Well, part of the reason for that is that we saw the absolute cowardice of federal judges in this. Several cases were brought alleging violations of the Emoluments Clause. And remember, there are 2 Emoluments Clauses that are relevant. One is a president may not take money from a foreign power without the express permission of Congress. But the other is you can't take it from the states, because we are a federal system. Not that Americans understand, many of them, what that means. But Donald extracted huge amounts of money from the states, and local governments are creatures of the state. So if the city of West Palm Beach puts money in your pocket, that means the state of Florida is doing it in violation of the Constitution. And judges dismissed these. So they first said, well, you have no standing to bring this case. Well, I'm sorry, who would have standing to bring a case then? The Constitution says you can't do this. To me, it's a good example. And by the way, I'm not a lawyer, Rick, but I've been a professor of law now for 15 years. I teach legal theory and principle. The court should have taken these cases. One of them was a very badly construed case, unfortunately, badly written by the plaintiffs. But had the courts done their duty, and we're now seeing in Donald's claim of absolute immunity that he is free to murder people, to have them murdered by subordinates. Those subordinates are, by his own lawyer's account, military officers who carry out illegal orders. They can be prosecuted. They could be punished to the full extent of the law, but Donald would be exempt. And yet, did our Supreme Court just dismiss this? No. They went into this long discussion that had nothing to do with what's called the question presented, which is what it's on every Supreme Court case. That's what they're supposed to talk about. Speculative matters, and they were acting not as judges, but as legislators. And if there's anything the conservative members of the court are constantly reminding us is, judges should not be legislators.
Should not legislate from the bench.
Except when their guy wants something, and suddenly all their principles go out the window.
It is something that as a former Republican and a conservative, I look at the way the court has reconfigured itself in the last 8 years, and especially in this last year, and watching it perform last week, this unbelievable backflip to try to accommodate what they know were abuses at the time, and what they can fully anticipate will be abuses in the immediate future. I mean, that, David, is something to me that I think that there is in the Washington, D.C. culture, whether it's legal or political, I think one of their biggest failings is that they continue to believe that there will somehow be a better version of Trump, that it will somehow get better, that something won't, that the things that are going to happen next are not as bad as they were before. And you know this better than almost anybody because you've studied him so closely. It never gets any better, does it?
Right. Well, in fact, the difference between Trump and the would-be dictators who would follow him, Tom Cotton, in particular, who was a former military officer, is that those people have competent management skills. They're a real threat. Trump did not succeed in his administration in doing everything he intended because he's an incompetent manager. He's a fraud at that. Now, we're seeing in this Project 2025 that people around Trump are preparing for a real tyrannical administration. They're very open about it. You may have, you've probably seen the video of the woman from the Heritage Foundation who wants to eliminate birth control because, as she says, sex should be consequential. I just have a hard time believing that'll sell very well with people in between the ages of teen and maybe 45.
Good luck.
We'll see. But that's what we need to be worried about, is that it isn't just Trump. It is the notion that we should eliminate our liberty and our freedom in favor of a dictator. And if we become a dictatorship, first of all, if Trump's the dictator, I fully expect he will find an excuse. I was surprised he didn't in the first administration, except he's incompetent. He's going to find a way to grab me, and I will not be shocked if I get shot. But I'm not going to back down either. The one thing you cannot do with someone like Trump is cower, as the courts have done. You have to stand firm. And this is, after all, we call ourselves the land of the brave. Well, be brave. Stand up to this guy and stand up to all the people who are enabling him.
I think that is something that, we see it from the very peak of the Republican Party today, with Mitch McConnell and Bill Barr and the rest of these people, where they don't want to admit that they're all in on the authoritarianism, but they also don't want to get on the wrong side of the authoritarianism. And so the courage is in deeply short supply among especially the people that could make a difference at the top of the Republican Party. How is it that Trump has bullied people like he has? Is it just the threat of violence, or is it something beyond that in his character and his sort of evil skill with gaslighting people?
Well, for all the critical things I've written about Donald back to 1989, when, by the way, I was the first person to write about him becoming president of the United States, 1989. In a perverse way, Rick, there are things about Trump that I have to admire. The same way that I once spent a lot of time with a hitman, and when I, after talking to the cops and everybody else, admired that, well, whatever else you think of this guy, he's really good at what he does for a living.
Right.
And
at least
Donald,
he's a professional.
Really good yes. And Donald is really good at taking issues and turning them into visceral slogans. Part of his campaign in 2016 was based on my books on the economy. Donald didn't read my best-selling series on the economy, but I know because intermediaries called me with questions that he had watched me on TV. And he took some of my ideas, turned them into things that would resonate with ordinary people. Throw out the policy, get to the heart of the thing. He's really good at that. And as a result of that, people whose brand of politics, and this is sadly most politicians, is to wet their finger and hold it up to the wind to say which way the wind is blowing, they see that there is a significant authoritarian, anti-democratic streak in the country, and they want to hedge their bets. They want to straddle that fence. Well, I'm for liberty, but I'm for making sure if we go authoritarian, I don't end up like Johnston on the firing squad list. And there's also profit in this. I mean, Bill Barr has obtained clients, very lucrative clients, because of his stances on some of these issues. So there's long been, Rick, and I wrote about this when I was at the New York Times in the late 90s and early in the century, a moral breakdown among the legal and accounting professions at the very top. The whole national tax shelters and sham board meetings like the one Al Gore took part in, those all reflected how people were so eager to get rich that they ignored the rules. The government didn't enforce the rules until I wrote about it in a number of cases. And some people, 15 people went to prison. But nobody was doing anything about this. So, there's the idea that in politics, things often go to the worst level until there's a reaction against it.
Right. And unfortunately, I think about 100 million Americans, who are supporters of Donald Trump, they believe things like the 2017 tax cut helped them. instead of helping about 200 high net worth individuals.
Yes.
And
don't call
you
it
know,
a tax cut. Don't call it a tax cut.
right.
It's not a tax
The wealth
cut. It's a tax
the wealth
increase
transfer.
deferred into the future with interest. Yes, it's a wealth transfer, but what it really is, if a tax cut doesn't generate more revenue than it cost, then it's a tax increase deferred into the future with interest. That's what it is. And
Right.
who's going to pay the burden of that? Well, people like Donald, who got a 40% cut in their marginal tax rate, 40% reduction, and big corporations, which saw their rate fall from 35 to 21, as well as getting a huge holiday for their offshore untaxed profits.
Right.
They are going to reap the benefits, and the rest of us are going to pay for it either through higher taxes in the future, through interest payments that block, therefore, spending on other programs, or reduced government services. It's not a tax cut. But that's part of Donald's genius. He persuaded people that a tax increase deferred into the future was a tax cut.
I think that one of the things that during that whole shenanigan, you know, I had left the Republican Party, you know, when I broke with Trump, but I called a friend of mine who was literally one of the people in McConnell's office, a lobbyist, literally writing the legislation. I said, just tell me there's any goddamn thing I can hold on to here. Tell me there's some middle class tax uplift. And he's like, you know me, fuck that shit. You know what? No, there's not. This is, you know, we're doing this for you know, the people that are writing the 7-figure checks. That's it, man. And you know, yeah, is it deeply cynical? Of course it is. Is it horrifying? It should be to most Americans, but I don't think most Americans have processed A, that the supposed tax benefits were sunset, B, that this entire insanity with this guy would never end up being delivered like the salesman promised them it would be delivered, because it's impossible.
Right. Let me give you something I reported recently from the official government data that goes to what's going on here in the game being played. Mm-hmm. It isn't just the tax rates that matter, it's enforcement of the law. Enforcement of tax law against people making $10 million a year or more. There are 55,000 households that make over $10 million, and their average income is around $33 million. The number of audits of these people has fallen, according to the IRS's latest report, by 86%, and the amount of additional tax collected has fallen 99%. Now, it's possible that among the very highest income people in America, a period of absolute propriety and following scrupulously the tax laws has come along. But I think the more likely explanation is what I've written about for years. The IRS auditors don't have enough resources to do the job. They are under pressure to do what is called audit light, L-I-T-E, like light beer.
Yep.
Get in, be quick, get out. And Congress has made a number of changes in the law that essentially handcuff the tax police. And that's what the IRS are, the tax police. And one of the things that might change this is if people understood we live in the Second American Republic. The first government, the Articles of Confederation government, failed. Why did it fail, and why did we create our Constitution? It's written down for us. We created the Constitution so we could tax ourselves. That is its primary purpose compared to the first American government, so that we, through our Congress, could tax ourselves, and secondarily, so we could regulate commerce, because the original American government had neither of those powers. If we taught that in schools, I think people might have a different attitude about it. And they might have a very different attitude about someone like Donald, whose tax returns, when Congress made them available, the Democrats in Congress made them available, showed that he had created more than 60 fictitious businesses. They're called Schedule C sole proprietorships.
Right.
Many of them had no revenue, but he took losses for them. Well, Donald was tried for tax fraud twice in the 1990s over his 1984 tax return. He lost. Now, these weren't criminal trials, they were civil. But among other things, they showed that he had not only done this, and judges put him on notice, don't do it again, which means his doing it again shows criminal intent. But in addition to that, he forged one of the tax returns. He could have been prosecuted. He took the tax return his tax preparer, his longtime lawyer and accountant, prepared, and he changed it, but he put the guy's signature on it with a photocopy machine. He could have been prosecuted and sent to prison for that. But we don't seriously deal with white-collar crime in America, and that's why Donald, as the third-generation head of a four-generation white-collar crime family, along with his relatives, get away with all this stuff. Because we're so focused on the guy who robbed somebody of a slice of pizza. A man got a life sentence for that in California. For a slice of pizza, life in prison. Instead of on the crimes that really damage society, and it's the kind of crimes Donald Trump has committed his entire life.
I mean, that is one thing that I think that there is a failure of. I mean, you've written 3 books about him. I've written 2 books about him. There have been dozens and dozens of books written since he became president about him. I think, to brag on us both a little, I think both of us sort of use the understanding that all of the swagger and the BS and the chest thumping was always to hide that he's a criminal. Was always to hide that he is an actual criminal who engages in a long-running lifetime pattern of this stuff. It's all. I mean, I had a story one time from a friend who befriended Melania early on. Barron was a child at the time, and they were having a little play date one time, and Donald Trump came in and told the story. He's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go buy some of those paintings down by those guys in Central Park, and then I'm going to rebrand them and sell them. And it was just like, it just struck me like, this is the most petty Annie bullshit little like low rent scam. I mean, the guy should be on the street doing 3-card Monte. He's just, I mean, and I still don't think anybody in the media has understood you have to write about him like he's a mob boss, not like he's a candidate or a businessman or a real estate developer or any of that shit.
Rick, you have hit the most important thing wrong in the news coverage, and especially the coverage in my former newspaper, the New York Times. It is treating Trump as if he's just a candidate who has a little difference to him. No, Donald Trump is a con man, and he needs to be covered in that manner, and that is not biased to do so. That is good journalism. And a couple of things people don't know about Donald that are in my biography that came out in 2016, The Making of Donald Trump. Donald Trump plied 12, 13, and 14-year-old children with liquor, limousines, and hotel rooms because they had money to gamble in his casinos. Nobody mistakes a 12-year-old for a 21-year-old. Nope. When I asked Donald about this years ago, it was like, so what? I paid a fine. Secondly, he did inexplicable favors for one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in America. He was his business partner. He wrote a letter. The letter seems to say on the surface, this is a good guy. He shouldn't go to prison. By the way, the people who just drove drugs for this guy from Florida to Ohio got 20 years just for driving the drugs, the mules, 20 years.
Of course.
He shouldn't serve any time. He's a good guy. Well, the letter really said, if you read it, was, hey, pal, keep your mouth shut and I'll take care of you. Well, somehow Donald got the case transferred to the courtroom of his sister in New Jersey, who was a federal judge. She recused herself from the case, but she had to tell the chief judge why. She had to say, I fly in this man's helicopters. He's personally piloted me. My husband, who's a lawyer, flies in them every week. Which, think about it, if you're the chief judge, federal judge in New Jersey, I hope the newspapers don't hear about this. This would be devastating. And the guy only served 18 months, not 20 years, 18 months. He never paid his fines because he said he was broke. But guess what? He moved into a $2.5 million Trump Tower apartment as soon as he got out after 18 months. I'm sorry. The strong evidence is Donald was involved in the Nancy side of this cocaine business.
Nothing would shock me in that space. Nothing at all. And I think the reality of Trump has always been, this is a guy, and look, I don't think he would ever use cocaine. I think he's too much of a, I don't think any of that's the case. But I think he's weird.
I agree with you.
I think he's so weird about like the glamour of crime and being a mob boss and being the big thug, being the bad guy in some ways, that I think he would love being in business with somebody like that. I think he would be fine. I
Well,
think
he would
think
be
about
very
that as
happy.
like, go ahead.
He'd be very happy to supply young women with cocaine, because that was sort of the coin of the realm in the 80s and 90s, to get illicit sex, cocaine, and he'd have no issue about that whatsoever. We do know that Donald, got Dr. Feelgood shots long ago. We have the medical records on that. They're in the public record. Donald's behavior and his cognitive problems, where he's giving a talk and talk like this, those are indicative of the long-term abuse of several different drugs. Adderall, which we know he's taken, is one of them.
Yep.
And Donald, by the way, Donald is not in good health.
No.
Joe Biden has suddenly come out of his shell and started going after Trump and mocking him, which is the smartest thing to do, is to make fun of him, because Donald has no sense of humor. But here's what I'd love to see. This is my fantasy of what to see. We actually get a debate between the two of them. Yep. And Joe Biden, channeling the actor Jack Palance, goes to the floor and does one-arm push-ups and says, "Come on, Donald, you can use two arms." Trump couldn't do a push-up. He certainly couldn't do 10 or 12.
No chance. I think that it's when all this is said and done, when all this is over, when Trump has gone on to his eternal punishment or reward, I think we are going to look back and go, how did America get so tricked by this guy? How did we get so fooled by this guy for so long? And I think that's...
Well, I hope you're right, Rick, but here's what I worry about. What I worry about is that long after you and I are gone, there's going to be a cult in America that says, well, Trump was right. Trump was right. It was the evil media and the traitor Republicans and the deep state, and that, like Hitler, he will endure. Because, there's still a cult of Hitler in Germany, and it's illegal to promote Nazi stuff in Germany, yet people do it.
Well, this weekend, there was a group of Italian fascists out celebrating the 70th anniversary of Mussolini's death. And, you're like, did you guys not know how this movie ended? Did you not see this movie? But they didn't, and they don't care. You may be right. It may be the outcome we dread, but as a country, we are fated to endure. So, well, David Cay Johnston, go ahead.
We can fix this if we change our education. We can fix this if we change our education. We need to teach people that the Boston Tea Party wasn't a protest against high taxes. It was a protest against a tax favor for the friends of King George III. We need to be honest about the slavery and the Civil War. You can't be a moral country if you teach a dishonest history. And it takes time to do this. The other thing we've got to do that's crucial is teach language. More than half of Americans read at the level of a sixth grader and below. Half at sixth grade. And 1 in 5 Americans is at third grade level, 8-year-olds or below. I just finished grading my 46 law school student papers. And some of them are terrific, but some of them don't know what a sentence is. I mean, how basic. You don't know what a sentence is.
It is really a grim reality that the joke about Trump saying, "I love the uneducated," he really does, and he needs them to win. So
he really does.
Well, David Cay Johnston, I am deeply appreciative of your time today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We look forward to seeing you again very soon, and as we descend into the hellmouth of this election.
Well, thank you, Rick. And I wish I had come up with your great phrase, "Everything Trump touches dies." That was one of the most brilliant insights of this era.
I appreciate that. Thanks again. All right. Elon Musk, bro. Dude, you're putting Nick Fuentes back on your platform. I just want to remind you that you're not required to do that. You're not required to welcome back an egregious, absolute, avowed neo-Nazi. You're not required to do that. That's not you showing a commitment to free speech. That's you turning your platform into a home for egregious Nazi douchebags. And if you're wondering why the revenues are down and wondering why the advertisers now are girls with nudes in bio in their profile, and not major brands, that would be why. And that's why you're on the enemies list.